In 1880, 18-year-old Florence Elizabeth Chandler from Mobile, Alabama, left the United States on the ship Baltic and headed towards England to start a new life. On that voyage, she met James Maybrick, a successful and wealthy cotton broker from Liverpool. They fell in love, and 14 months later, in July 1881, 42-year-old Maybrick made her his wife at St James's Church in Piccadilly in London. Over the next 2 years, the couple travelled regularly between England and America. They went on to have 2 children, a son, James, born in 1882, and a daughter, Gladys, born in 1886. The family settled down when they found a home in Battlecrease House in Aigburth, near Liverpool. By this time, Florence had become aware of her husband's hypochondria and his adultery. She discovered he kept a mistress with whom he had 5 children, but to the outside world, they seemed the model couple to Liverpool society. However, Florence failed to endear herself to Maybrick's family, especially his brother Michael, and a number of the servants at the house disliked her, including their nanny, Alice Yap. To make herself feel good, Florence spent money, accruing large debts, had several romantic liaisons, including with one of Maybrick's brothers, Edwin, all the time trying to keep up the air of respectability in Liverpool. In March 1889, Florence told her husband she needed to go to London to see a sick aunt, so a booking was made at the Flatman Hotel in the city. Instead, she'd spent 3 days in the hotel with cotton broker and businessman Alfred Brearley. He'd been introduced to Florence in 1887 when he visited the Maybrick home. The affair wasn't particularly kept under wraps, so when she returned home, a blazing row ensued, and Maybrick ended up beating her mercilessly, giving her a pair of black eyes. The following month, Maybrick became unwell. He told her he'd taken a strong dose of strychnine, and in the early stages of his illness, Florence looked after him, giving him Valentine's meat juice, a common restorative at the time. While giving him the juice, she later claimed he'd asked for some of his white powder to be added. This turned out to be arsenic, which he'd taken before. She later testified in court that the drink was spilled, and he never ingested any of it. Meanwhile, she wrote to her lover, Brearley, and informed him of her husband's illness, but the letter was intercepted by Alice Yap, the nanny, and the affair was exposed. On 11th May 1889, 50-year-old James Maybrick died after suffering from severe abdominal pain and vomiting, all signs of poisoning. The gossiping of the house servants and Maybrick's friends led to suspicions that Florence may have killed him, so Michael Maybrick put her under house arrest and took her 2 children from the house. He then informed the police of his suspicions. Florence was arrested on 14th May and charged with the murder of her husband. The police undertook a search of the family home and found large quantities of arsenic and other toxins which had not been hidden. These were tested by chemical analyst Edward Davis, and he stated there was enough arsenic in the house to kill 3 people. However, it does raise the question of who in the household had bought it all, and who had access to it. It wasn't Florence alone. A post-mortem was carried out on Maybrick, and it was found that although a small quantity of arsenic had been found, it wasn't enough to kill him. Small quantities of strychnine, morphia, prussic acid, and hyoscine were also found. But again, none were in large enough quantities to kill him. Following his burial, he was exhumed quickly afterwards for more tests to be carried out, but again, these didn't prove any cause of death. He was reburied in the Anfield Cemetery in Liverpool. Nonetheless, Florence stood trial at St George's Hall in Liverpool on 31st July 1889 before Mr Justice James Stephen, who 2 years earlier was found to be insane. Critically, 4 years before the trial, he'd suffered a stroke, and this had impaired his judgment. Sir Charles Russell acted on behalf of Florence, along with Mr Pickford, with the Crown prosecution case being led by Mr Addison, Queen's Counsel. Much was made of her infidelity during the trial, and it was stark that it was okay for a married man to have a mistress, but not a married woman to have a lover. Pretty, young, and foreign, Florence was on trial not just for murder, but infidelity. When the evidence was produced regarding the post-mortem examination, medical opinion was divided. Dr. Thomas Stevenson, a Home Office pathologist, claimed that despite the inconclusive result, Maybrick had indeed succumbed to arsenic poisoning. However, another Home Office pathologist, Sir Charles Tidy, was of the opinion gastroenteritis was to blame. In a break from tradition at the time, Florence took the stand herself. It was a disaster. Instead of showing any sorrow at the death of her husband, she calmly told the court she'd bought flypapers, which she'd soaked in order to extract the arsenic contained in them for a face wash. She had followed the exact recipe she'd been prescribed in America. She also told the court she'd expressed concern to the family doctor about Maybrick's ingestion of so many different, and potentially dangerous, drugs. It transpired that chemists in Liverpool had been supplying him with various drugs, including arsenic in both powder and liquid form, for around 10 years. The judge took hours to sum up, an inordinate amount of time, and it was clear he expected the jury to find her guilty, even though there were many inconsistencies. Florence was indeed found guilty and sentenced to death. There was a public outcry, and several petitions with thousands of signatures for clemency were handed into the Home Office. After a short time, Florence had her sentence commuted to life imprisonment for the attempted murder of her husband with arsenic, but she was never tried under this charge. In the end, Florence remained incarcerated for over 14 years, while her mother, Caroline, now Baroness von Rock, as she'd married her fourth husband, Baron Adolf von Rock, in 1872, and numerous others in society, campaigned for her release. This included Sir Charles Russell, who'd always believed she was innocent. On 20th January 1904, Florence was released from Aylesbury Prison, and a month later she sailed for America. She wrote a book called My Lost 15 Years, and often gave lectures about her court case and incarceration. She lived much of the rest of her life as a recluse in Connecticut, with only her cats for company, in a dilapidated cabin. She died on 23rd October 1941, destitute. She was buried in the St Michael's Chapel Cemetery in Kent, Lichfield County.